Hello and welcome to Computer Applications and Architectural Design. Today I want to go over how to make drawings from using the Make2D command in Rhino. And this is going to be really useful for converting objects into curves and on flat surfaces in order to export them into Illustrator or other graphic representation softwares. So let's take a look at what I have. I have an idea for curves. These are some scaffoldings for generating surfaces. And then I've made a series of surfaces here that are sort of the moments between each of those curves, and then there's a transformation occurring where these control curves are being rotated, and I'm using some scaffoldings here to control how that rotation occurs, or those deformation occurs. And in this iteration, there's an idea of how to generate form between those transformations, and an idea of beginning to think of where dowels become positioned to set these things up. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is go over a variety of ways of making using the Make2D command. So for one, the Make2D requires a view. So let's find a good view for our first set of drawings. So I'm going to change my camera, and I have or set my view. I have a variety of types of views. We are currently in a perspectival space. Let's change it to an isometric space. So why don't we go to the northeast here. Now this alone is a pretty good way of looking at these iterations. So why don't we do this as a whole? We're going to make 2D here. So let's sort of get let's go back to set our view. Okay. Now I can move it around and I can sort of position it. Once you have it in a place you like, let's save the view. So in order to do that, I'm going to go here to my Set View tab and save view by name, and I'm going to give this view, you can't press spacebar here, so I'm going to say northeast axon. In order to pull that up again, I can, the camera here, toggle my views. So say I move it around to reset it, I can do this. Alright, so let's hit Make2D. And let's take a look at what our options are. So when you first open Make2D, it asks to verify that you're in the right view. It then asks, how do you want to project, where do you want to project your curves onto? So I'm saying it's based on this view. The next thing is you want to make sure the object maintains source layers is on. So if you look over here, I have my layers all organized. So each of these components belongs to their appropriate layers. So when I go into Illustrator, those attributes get carried through. So I want to make sure that maintain source layers is on. The next thing I want to do is look to see if my hidden lines are checked. So hidden lines is whether or not to include lines which are obscured by a surface or a poly surface. In this case, I want to say yes. And the other thing is whether or not you have a clipping plane active. So if we do our clipping plane, we say, at the moment we don't have any, so that's okay, but the next bit is we're going to show how to introduce a clipping plane. And then whether or not you want to group your output or not. So if you group your output, what it means is sort of each sort of sets of curves or mappings gets grouped. And I find that difficult to edit. So I'm going to say no. Okay. So let's take a look at what this looks like. All right, so now let's go to our top view. And we see, voila. Here is a drawing that we can now export. So It's important to note here that surfaces have a difficult time being mapped 2D, but curves are much better. So we can see that there's some issues with getting the correct geometries, so you have to go and do some editing work. And once you're in a good place, what we could do is we can export selected to Illustrator, and we're going to say this is going to be example 3, process work. And we're going to say yes. Now here we want to make sure our scale is going to be adequate, so I'm going to do 1 inch equals a foot. Say OK. Let's open up that file. So we're going to go open process work, and we'll notice that our artwork is not on the boards. So let's see if we can get that right. So what I've done is in the art bounds, the artboard tool, we go fit to artwork bounds. Okay, so now we have it brought in. Now the attributes that we've given it in Rhino are carried through, and so we can start to see that working really well. So we have some dash lines, we have different line weights, different line colors. So these are really useful in making it simpler to go between sort of editing in both simultaneously. So you'll notice here that some curves are easier. I generated a series of curves around this to indicate its curvature. So that's working really well. Whereas in some of these others, it is a bit more difficult to tell, but it's still legible from a different perspective of saying that there are shifts occurring. So depending on the level or the type of information you're showing, you can graphically make these decisions. Another quick comment about using Illustrator is you're able to blend things in Illustrator. So for example, if this is a 1 and these are smaller, and I can use my blend command here, and I want to blend between these curves. Let's preview it. Let's do it by distance. Say OK. So if we sort of zoom in here, what we could see is these blends work really well when my curves are controlled. And you'll notice that they get darker towards the edges. So if I go in to my blend, double click to get into this group, were I to change this, all of a sudden my blends are reacting. They're blending between the different steps. So you can use that to your advantage in Illustrator or in Rhino. Obviously I have some geometry that is working against how I've designed it, so you can take a little time to edit this and make sure it's right. Let's go back to Rhino and let's take a look at, why don't we delete these lines? Let's take a look at how to generate a sectional perspective. So delete layer, yes to all. Let's go back to our view. So a sectional perspective. This time, why don't we use a clipping plane? So I'm going to go here to my clipping plane. And what's really nice is I sort of already have a digital scaffolding to set this up. So I'm going to go vertical. So where do I want to cut my sections? I want to cut my sections through the first third. And let's turn this around 180. Okay, there we go. And the next thing is to make sure to orient I need to be able to orient my sectional perspective to the right place. So first of all, I'm not in a perspectival space. So let's go back to a perspectival space. Okay. The next thing we need is to orient our camera perpendicular to this frame. So there's a few camera tools that we can use here. One way that's nice is to move camera, so place camera and target. So if I place my target and my camera, or I can also look at a surface. So let's see if we can do this. So let's look at a surface. So right now I don't have a solid surface yet, so I need to make one. So why don't we pull this out and let's draw a surface. So we're going to do make sure that rectangle is going vertically, and let's see. Okay. So I'm making it a planar surface. I don't want this to be a print layer, so let's do a new layer and call it camera operations. Rename. Spell it right. Okay. Change object layer. Now here I want to go over and under print width I want to make sure it says no print. Okay. Alright. So let's set our look at surface. So orient a camera to surface. And I want to put it right there in the center. Great. Now let's make sure that we're looking at the right scale so I can sort of zoom in. Let's save this view. So to save our view, we're going to go to the top here and save view and make sure to name it. Remember, you can't hit the space bar, so we'll do section perspective. And if we get out of this space, let's go back to our clipping plane. We can turn this off. We can delete this. Let's move our perspective back there, and let's, we said it was section perspective. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So now what I want to do is select my objects, Make2D, and in this case I want to make sure my clipping plane intersection is clicked on. So I say OK. Let's take a look at my Make2D by double-clicking the top. And there we have it. So here I'm showing my information. When you go into do your editing, you can, and when you're editing your line work, you can sort of control more easily how you're working with. So your clipping plane lines are all of your lines where your clipping plane cut through. So in these, you can give them a hierarchy. So for example, I click these three, and instead of default, I want to make that a thick line, and I want to make them all red. Okay. Okay. I'm going to turn these back on. Now I can sort of get some control over what I see, and when I export this into Illustrator, process work, let's do sectional perspective, maintain my scale. Let's go File, Open. And remember, here we go to our artwork bounds and fit bounds to artwork. And there we go. And now you can edit your graphics here, and you have the ability to understand really quickly where your cut lines are. Okay, thank you so much for watching.